So wage controls and minimum wage laws. Well, when the price, wages are the price for labor. So when the price for labor or wages goes up, demand for it goes down. That means that minimum wages only increase unemployment. You see, when a person's hired, the employer wants to pay them according to their productivity. How much can you put into the business? Are you worth enough to me to pay you this much? So when the minimum wage is so high that there's a lot of people whose productivity are less than the minimum wage, then they're not going to be hired. The business will lose money with people that they pay who aren't productive enough. And so minimum wage discriminates against young and inexperienced people who aren't as productive, and older workers, and sometimes minorities as well. So it's kind of a problem with minimum wage laws that they don't really help people out. They just create unemployment. You see, when the government intervenes in the market, usually what happens is the opposite of what they're trying to help out, which is always the problem. And so they try to help out the young people, they try to help out the minorities, and they end up harming them instead. Same with price controls. Price controls disrupt the peaceful and efficient process of the law of supply and demand. We saw how that all worked out earlier in the free market, but when the government intervenes, it's a lot worse. You see, if the prices are artificially low, then there's more demand than there is supply. The sellers can discriminate and choose who they're going to sell their product to. They can sell to their family first, or their friends first, or based on class or race first. So the government then has to intervene again and impose these schemes to help equal this out and let everybody have their own fair share of the product. People then turn to substitutes. For instance, if there's a price control on milk, people will turn to other juice, like juice and other things to drink instead. So then the prices will go up on that, so they have to institute price controls on the substitutes as well. And it kind of never ends. The less efficient companies go out of business because they can't make money at this artificially low price. It doesn't account for their cost of production. And the companies that stay in business have to cut back because they're losing money, which makes the shortages even worse. So then the government decides, well, the problem is the cost to the companies is too great. So we're going to impose price controls on the products that they have to buy to create their good. Well, then that creates more shortages across the whole economy, and it keeps going and going and going. You see, what the Austrians believe that whenever the government intervenes, they cause a problem. Then the government has to intervene again to solve that problem, which causes another problem. And so you go on and on and on. And it never ends unless you can get the government entirely out of the market. If the price for a good is too high, there is too much of that good because there's more supply than there is demand. That becomes embarrassing to the government. In the 30s, they had a massive excess of wheat. They had way too much wheat because FDR imposed price controls. They even experimented with paving roads with wheat because they had too much of it. They don't want it sitting around. I mean, these big piles of wheat everywhere looks kind of bad, especially when the people are starving and would gladly take the wheat for less. So they had to figure out some scheme of getting rid of this wheat so no one would get mad at them. So that's how price controls work in the market, is that they don't work, basically. How about rent control? Well, the problem with rent control is that renters can't raise rent prices, landlords can't raise rent prices under rent control to deal with rising taxes and cost of utilities. So in middle-class apartments and so forth, they can cut back on the frills. Like, they don't need the hallways painted every year. I mean, people living there don't really care too much about that. However, in low-income rentals, they have to cut back on some of the basic utilities, like heating and hot water and so forth, to cover their costs, because they've already taken out the frills, so the low-income people can't afford it. Also, under rent control, renters can discriminate against, the landlords can discriminate against the renters. If you have a landlord who's racist, he can choose what type of person is going to be in his apartments. Because there is so much demand for his apartments, he knows that if they leave, he can always find someone else. So instead of helping minorities and low-income people, rent controls harm them. It seems to be the stereotype that the landlords and the renters are always fighting with each other. They're always bickering, And the only reason that is because of rent controls. And under rent controls, the landlord is able to impose a lot more of the rules and regulations because they know that if they kick this person out, they can get someone else in. In most cases, without rent control, they wouldn't enforce the laws against too much noise or, pets or whatever, because they want to make money. So it's only under rent control that we have this conflict and struggle between the landlord and the renter. Also, this turns the buildings into slums eventually, because they have to cut out so much stuff that they're eventually abandoned and they look ugly and nobody uses them. We see that especially, in Rockford, a lot of rundown places. Well, why is that? Because of rent control. Also, tariffs. What is a tariff? Well, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. Tariffs are supposed to be patriotic and supportive of our own economy and industries. But is that true? Well, you see, the argument for tariffs relies on the faulty and Marxist view of labor. That is, it really doesn't matter what people are producing as long as they're producing something. We got to put Americans back to work. And it doesn't matter what they're making as long as they're making something. Basically the idea. But you see, even Adam Smith, who wasn't really an Austrian, some have said that if we didn't have Adam Smith, we wouldn't have had Marx, because Adam Smith contributed to that faulty labor theory of value. But at any rate, even Adam Smith realized that consumers aren't concerned about employment. Most people don't go to the store and buy something because they want an American to have a job. Go to the store and buy something because it's at the price that you want and it's something that you want. So, for example, the Japanese and Chinese are often demonized in the U.S. Well, the only reason that they're selling in the U.S. is because they can make money. And the only reason that they can make money is because Americans want what they're producing. So they're helping Americans. They're providing something that we want. So why should we demonize them and try to kick them out of the country when they're giving us something that we want? You see, Murray Rothbard summed this up pretty well. Murray Rothbard was an Austrian modern economist. He said, in short, inefficient producers are trying to deprive all of us of products we desire so that we will have to turn to inefficient firms. American consumers are to be plundered. Let's see. He also said that protectionism is simply a plea that consumers, as well as general prosperity, be hurt as to confer permanent special privileges on groups of less efficient producers. So people in the U.S., generally companies in the U.S., aren't as efficient as those overseas, so they can't compete as well. Well, why are they less efficient, and why is overseas goods sold here cheaper? Well, we can look at a few things. Firstly, wage rates. The minimum wage laws that we just looked at probably play into this as well. Those in Asia can be paid half of what someone here would be paid. And so that minimum wage laws contribute to that. And also, people in the U.S. have more productivity. In the U.S., we have so many machines to do things that workers are more productive here, which means that they're going to be paid more. A person in the U.S. can make a product and make more of it with machines than someone in China can by hand. So they're going to be paid more because they're more productive. Also, in Asia, there are more employees or possible workers than there are in the U.S., which drives the wage down.